And that's, I think, but it seems to me that's why non-self-execution is an important point here. It seems that it does seem, and I've argued in some articles, that this is the more important way, maybe not more important, but just as important as the method by which we enter into the agreements, is to ensure that there is a non-self-execution limitation on these delegations, so that, contra David Sloss, the non-self-execution doctrine would then allow us to enter into the international agreements, but to allow us also to control and limit the way in which these delegations are implemented domestically. So John's work is focused on more how do we get into these delegations. But it seems to me the non-self-execution point is crucial for what many people are worried about, which is the actual, when you delegate power to the national institution, everything's happy in the beginning, right? It's wonderful, they'll do great things. But then you don't know. The delegation is what we fear is that they'll do something we didn't think that they would do, and they'll screw things up, and that it wasn't what we wanted them to do or what we thought they would do. And so we need some way to stop, to check them, and the non-self-execution was at least a way to shield the domestic legal system. Under John's proposal, that wouldn't change. It would simply be harder to get into the delegation, but it wouldn't necessarily police the delegation on the back end. And I don't believe he makes the argument that we need a robust non-self-execution understanding. In fact, it might be the opposite. And David's arguing that once you enter in the delegation, at least state courts and federal officers are automatically bound, regardless, perhaps, even of what the Senate or the President say when they ratify this treaty. So it doesn't seem to. So it seems like the concern about delegations we're going to have is the faceless international bureaucrat telling Americans what to do without any ability to stop them. And neither the proposal of going through the treaty process or going through or especially treating all of them as self-executing or having direct effect is likely to exacerbate that problem, and as a political matter, frankly, discourage entering into these international institutions. Now, I should say that there, of course, are delegations that largely don't impact our domestic law. You could delegate, for instance, powers which are really within the realm of the president, say decisions on with respect to foreign affairs, right? So decisions on whether or not a delegation in the context of, I don't know, arms control, or perhaps in the context of military movements where the president has sole discretion anyway, or mostly on movement. But I think it seems to me what's at stake in the delegation battle is this domestic effect. So I wonder and worry, especially for John, whether the treaty process and his reliance on the supermajority treaty process really necessarily solves all the concerns. So non-self-execution seems to me an important point. I'm also not totally persuaded by the fact that the treaty clause, just because Alexander Hamilton said you could do whatever you wanted through the treaty clause to obviate structural constraints otherwise applicable by the Constitution, that we can be so confident the treaty clause is necessarily a sufficient solution. I mean, you might imagine that, although the Jay Treaty might be one example, a counterexample, that with respect to substantial, serious changes to our structural system, what we really need is a constitutional amendment, like some other countries have done in order to bring themselves into greater compliance with international sort of systems. Of course, that does seem kind of difficult. And talk about supermajority, right? That's like super majority. But it might be that's a possible alternative way if we wanted to really talk seriously about process as a way of policing the international delegations process. Okay, so what I want to do now is we actually have a fair amount of time. So I wanted actually to allow each of the panelists to respond to my comments, and then each of them has the opportunity to ask questions of their other panelists if they have any. So we'll start with John.
Okay, let me make two points. First, actually, about the federalism point. I think what your comments raise is, are there structural reasons the president is more likely to protect federalism? And I think there may be such structural reasons, including the president's actual greater need to have state officials, thinking about his re-election, his party's re-election. Moreover, the president, I think, actually has perhaps more interest in jurisdictional competition than other actors, because that leads to economic growth. But that, I think, raises the interesting explanation. Is there some structural explanation that goes beyond politics? With respect to self-execution, well, certainly I don't want to be misunderstood. I do not agree, and I don't want to go into great length, because I don't think it makes so much difference to the future. I certainly think that there can be you don't have to have self-executing treaties. You cannot have self-executing treaties and make these matters just a matter of international obligation. The difficulty with that, as I suggest, though, is without direct effect, we're not going to get direct effect from others as well. And for all the reasons, if there are actual externalities, it may be impossible to go and negotiate things quickly enough to do that, to address real issues in the modern world. Is the supermajority of the treaty sufficient? Well, I think it may be, because of course people will understand those costs, the costs of delegation, and they will negotiate for constraints in light of the supermajority, in the shadow of that supermajority. It's going to be hard to get a supermajority of the Senate to delegate matter to, as you put it, faceless international bureaucrats. That's a pretty good slogan, I think. So I think that's a pretty substantial, and I think it's important to note we haven't been doing a lot of international delegations of direct effect. And in fact, the biggest delegation of direct effect we now have is under NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And that was precisely done under a congressional agreement, which would not be legal under my system. You'd have to go through a treaty, but it certainly could not have gotten the 2/3 vote in the Senate. So that, I think, is much more substantial bite as a practical matter. I think, in fact, I'm quite confident. As you know, there are a lot of scholars who are very worried that the 2/3 requirement of the Senate will make it impossible to enter into quite the opposite, these international delegations with direct effect. I'm less worried about that because there are these costs. There are these agency costs. There are these democratic costs in which I think that has a substantial counterbalance. So I do think it is a substantial constraint, as evidenced by our not entering into many of these, but still giving the opportunity to enter them into when there are really substantial reasons to do so, which there may be for global climate matters and for other kinds of matters in the future.
David?
All right, so I guess